the last few decades, the threat of human-caused climate change has been heavily studied and reported. The scientific consensus is now clear, and we've seen a shift away from why is this happening to when will the worst happen, and finally now to how exactly will this happen. We know massive, potentially catastrophic changes are just around the corner, and the scientific community has shifted its attention from whether humans are exacerbating climate change to exactly what kinds of disasters to expect. In this episode, we're going to take a look at the recent IPCC climate report and break down what changes we can expect to see in the near future and beyond. Before we go any further, we need to establish a baseline for understanding. There will be climate change deniers in the comments. There always are. But these people are a very vocal minority. There is no longer any doubt that human activity has drastically affected the rate of climate change, and we have mountains of peer-reviewed evidence to prove it. If you're one of the people who believes climate change is a hoax, just consider who would benefit from you believing that lie. Fossil fuel advocates, special interest groups, and members of the current US and foreign governments who are heavily dependent on the fossil fuel industry for donations. They are selling your future and your children's future for a quick buck. Look at the evidence, do your research. This shouldn't be controversial. Every single person on Earth, regardless of political leaning or beliefs, would benefit from the actions recommended by the IPCC report. With that out of the way, let's look at the report in question. First of all, what is the IPCC? The IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Founded in 1988, the IPCC is an intergovernmental body of the United Nations, tasked with providing the world with an objective, scientific view of climate change and its various impacts. One thing to understand about the IPCC is that it doesn't conduct climate studies itself. Rather, it assesses published works from thousands of individuals and groups worldwide. These thousands of scientists contribute to the body of data on a voluntary basis, meaning none of them receive payments from any outside special interest group. When the IPCC is ready to issue a report, which includes a summary for global policymakers, the document is subjected to a line-by-line approval by delegates from each participating government, usually including the governments of more than 120 countries. The IPCC is the internationally accepted authority on climate change, and its reports have the agreement of leading climate scientists and each participating government. So, in short, when the IPCC issues a report, the world knows it's the real deal. That brings us to the 2018 report. You can find a link to the full document in the description below. Its full title is really long, so for the sake of brevity, we'll refer to it as SR15 or the report. The document itself is massive. The technical summary alone is 25 pages long. The entire thing cites 6,000 scientific reports. The summary for policymakers is much more palatable, at just over 30 pages long. In it, we get what's essentially a SparkNotes version of perhaps the direst warning the world has ever received. In short, we have 12 years to drastically change the course of our future. We've already passed the point of no return to keep global temperatures below around 1 degree Celsius warmer than pre-industrial levels. The race now is to keep it from exceeding 1.5. Even half a degree's difference could make for catastrophic changes around the world. This is the part where people usually get confused. What difference does 1.5 degrees make? I get it. I live in Texas, where it can be 40 degrees in the morning and 85 by noon. But consider places where the temperature is more or less stable. Take the Arctic, or Greenland, for example. Greenland is covered by a massive ice sheet that's kilometers thick in some places. In the summer, much of this ice is just barely staying frozen, and some places have even started melting. Now crank up the temperature a couple degrees Celsius. If that's enough to start a runaway melt, and the entire ice sheet melted, the sea level, on average, would rise by 7 meters. Imagine your favorite beach, underwater, coastal property destroyed, entire islands and huge amounts of coastline submerged, and the millions of inhabitants forced to move elsewhere. You think your country has an immigrant problem now? Just wait until entire island nations are destroyed by the rising seas. And don't think the United States is exempt from these effects. Florida is particularly susceptible to even a small increase in sea level. Besides a third of the state potentially going under, all of its barrier islands would be well below sea level. And with them goes any protection from hurricanes. An already hard-hit state would become ground zero of increasingly powerful hurricanes. But this is all speculation, right? No one knows for sure just how many Floridians will be going for a dip in the near future. Well, SR15 has some hard numbers for us. The disparity in negative impacts between 1.5 degrees of warming and 2 degrees is truly shocking. At 1.5 degrees, 6% of insects, 8% of plants, and 4% of vertebrates will lose over half of their natural geographic range. At 2 degrees, those numbers increase to 18% of insects, 16% of plants, and 8% of vertebrates. 1.5 degrees is projected to destroy 90% of what remains of the world's coral reefs. 2 degrees is expected to wipe them out entirely, completely destroying one of the ocean's richest ecosystems. At 1.5 degrees of warming, we can expect to see a completely ice-free Arctic summer once every century. At 2 degrees, once every decade. Global annual catch rate for marine fisheries will drop by 1.5 million tons at 1.5 degrees, and by 3 million tons at 2 degrees. These figures go on, and each one could potentially trigger an avalanche of other negative effects. And we haven't even looked at the consequences for human life. It shouldn't be a surprise that the populations that will suffer the most will be the poorer and less developed countries, and those in fragile ecosystems, such as in agricultural or coastal areas. If we could limit the maximum global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius, it would drastically reduce the number of people thrust into poverty and heightened risk of climatic events by up to several 100 million by 2050. The fallout of an increase of 2 degrees for humanity sounds truly biblical. A massive increase in vector-borne illnesses like malaria, along with an expansion of their geographical range, ozone depletion, a drastic increase in heat-related mortality, huge reductions in crop yields, including maize, rice, wheat, and other cereal crops, as well as a reduction in nutritional quality, drought and famine, flooding and extreme weather, and a stagnation of economic growth, to name a few. This is all very scary stuff, and it should be. We've managed to ignore the science for decades, and now it's time to pay the price. Thankfully, humans are very good at adapting and solving problems, especially if they're problems we created ourselves. We will have to deal with the long-term effects of the temperature increase we've already locked in, but we can and should do something to mitigate any further risk. The report lists a number of adaptation options for the regions who should expect serious challenges the soonest, including coastal defenses, sustainable aquaculture, and ecosystem restoration. But the truth of the matter is that we're largely at the mercy of world governments. Sure, we can stop eating meat, drive electric cars, and use less water at home, but even if every single individual did their part, it's still only a tiny step in the right direction. Just 100 companies are responsible for 71% of the entire world's carbon emissions, and just 25 of those 100 are responsible for half. As long as those companies are allowed to keep doing what they're doing, we're screwed. End of story. We could be optimistic and say, well, now that we have this report, world governments will obviously implement the necessary restrictions. Maybe in some countries, but if we've learned anything from the US in the last 2 years, it's that enough people in positions of power either don't believe in science or don't care about the future of their nation and the world that we've gone in the opposite direction. Legislation designed to protect the environment has been rolled back or repealed entirely, and individuals in the pocket of the fossil fuel industry are at the reins of the very groups that could enact positive change and stop this downward spiral. But say, by some miracle, the world comes to an agreement that we're going to meet the challenge to keep temperature rise below 2 degrees Celsius. What would that require? In short, the single most monumental shift in energy, public policy, personal lifestyle, and consumption habits in history. We would need to transition to 100% renewable energy. Stop using fossil fuels for transportation. That means stopping production of traditional gasoline-powered cars, ships, trains, and airplanes. Stop cutting down trees and start planting them by the thousands. Stop factory farming and at least drastically reduce the world's meat intake, and hopefully transition entirely to lab-grown meats or other alternatives. If this sounds impossible and unlikely, well, that's because we've never done anything of this scale before. But it has to be done. Any of these steps on its own is a good thing, but it won't be enough. This is not something to be put off for another decade, or even another year. We as citizens of the world need to start putting real pressure on our governments now to get the ball rolling. If we don't speak up, they likely won't act against their corporate overlords. We all have to do our part by voting for candidates who support green energy goals and sustainability, and acknowledge the threat climate change poses to all of us. We have to educate friends and family who might not understand what's at stake. If we all work hard and do the right thing, we can make the world a safe place for future generations. It's easy to see that climate change is a real challenge, but if you're like me, it's hard to see anything without your contacts. If you wear contacts and find yourself dreading that annual appointment to renew your prescription, then you're going to love Simple Contacts. It's a great new company that makes this annoying process simple. Simple Contacts lets you renew.
All right. Well, this was the video of the IPCC, what it is and what it does. Ishpriya, please could you start introducing yourself? We have, I think, enough participants so that we can start. We are the APYGN, we are the Asia Pacific Young Greens, and we have a network so that we can support young people in our region, in the Asia Pacific region. We currently have 16 members, and this is our first webinar. Hopefully it will be successfully launched. We will be presenting first about the climate change by Ishpriya. She will be introducing herself in a bit. And after the presentation, please, or during the presentation, if you have any questions, you can send them on the chat or send it to me on a private message, and I can list them. After the presentation, we're going to have a questions and answer session. And yes, and you can share with us your experience about climate change, the political ideas of how governments should be tackling that issue. So Ishpriya, the mic is yours.
By the way, are you recording the session? Oh,
Yes.
you are. Okay. Cool. So let's start. So I am a young member of the India Greens Party, the youngest in fact, and I'm also a member of the PAC in the party, and I've been into climate activities since last year in 2019, since June. And I got very interested in it because it was literally about survival. so that is something that's the only thing that could get me to do something like a social work and take it up so diligently. So I have a group called Climate Crew, which I started last year, and it was a students group. We started going to schools and colleges, and now we are here collaborating with the Asia Pacific Young Greens Network and the Asia Pacific Greens Federation. So I'll skip to the presentation now. Okay. So I'm sure everyone has heard about climate change. And we've been hearing about global warming since our childhood, I guess. But we've all slept in our environmental classes, including me. And if let me just tell you, if by any miracle this problem is solved, climate change, I would still sleep in my environmental classes. Just telling you. Okay. So why is this problem so different? And we've been hearing about global warming since so many years, but why is it different this time? So basically what is different now is that we have a deadline. Earlier, we didn't know of any such deadlines. But now in 2018, there came a new report and they told us about a deadline. So this is literally a race against time to fight climate change. Okay. So I will tell you what the deadline is all about. Hold on, my screen is okay. Now we all know about the greenhouse gases and the greenhouse effect. I'm sure you all have studied about it. It's like when the rays of the sun enter in the atmosphere. Okay, can everyone mute their mics, please? Aya, can you mute the mics of the participants? No. Thanks. So I was saying, so the rays of the sun, when they enter the Earth's atmosphere, they are absorbed by the Earth's surface. We all know that by those gases. So when they come inside, they have a certain wavelength, but when they're radiated back, they have an even longer wavelength, which is invisible. Okay, and that is even better absorbed by gases like carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, methane. These are even better absorbed. Okay, so the greenhouse effect is the basic thing, but so let's just see the proportion, the contribution compared to other contributors. So as you can see in this graph, greenhouse gas is the biggest contributor. So what we mean by anthropogenic forcings is human-made forcings, right? So natural forcings would be the sun's rays, okay? And when you're talking about negative anthropogenic forcings, like that would mean cooling, right? You must be wondering, how are humans cooling the planet? That would be due to pollutants like aerosol, like when we pollute, aerosols are released, and that causes somewhat of a cooling effect. But the proportion is far smaller than the heating effect. So it's basically incomparable. It's nothing to be proud of, because we are heating the planet at a very large level. Okay. Look at the contribution of the greenhouse gases in the warming of the surface temperature. Now, a lot of people argue, it's a very common question by climate skeptics, and a super common question. The contribution of human beings in terms of emissions, carbon dioxide emissions, is so less compared to the natural system emissions, right? It's literally around 3 or 4% only, the contributions made by human beings. Then why do we need to worry? Why are we calling it human-made climate change? So the reason behind that, okay, so there's a whole cycle called the carbon cycle. So there are sinks and there are emitters, right? So carbon sinks will absorb carbon dioxide and emitters will emit carbon dioxide. So it's a balanced cycle. It has been a balanced cycle. Now, if you are adding more carbon dioxide, even if it's like super less, it's like 3% only, but we are adding more and more every year, then it keeps piling up, because carbon dioxide is one gas that stays in the atmosphere for hundreds of years. Okay, so it keeps piling up. So we are adding to the net carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Yes. Okay, so we don't have so much storage capacity on the planet, but we are just adding. So we obviously have to face the consequences. Okay, now as you can see, the total estimated sources do not match total estimated sinks over here, right? The proportion is not proper. It's out of the balance, basically. It's not natural, because we've added extra carbon that was not emitted from natural processes. Okay. Now this is sad and interesting at the same time. I don't know if you all have heard of the giant company ExxonMobil. They were some people blame them for crimes against humanity, because they knew well in advance, like around 40 years in advance, about climate change and what emissions could cause in the future. At that time, climate change wasn't like a public thing, but Exxon had conducted extensive research on this, and they had all the data, but they kept it from their investors. And even like when they had to release something, they did it in such a way that people would think that it's a very small, minute number, 3 and 4% only. They did not explain the science behind it, nothing. So people just ignored it. But Exxon knew well in advance that what was going to happen, and they hid it from their investors. So they published this advertorial, as you can see, showing that human activities contribute only 3 or 4%, which is true. But as I just explained the science to you, the problem is the piling up. The net carbon increases. So okay, so yeah, so why is that so wrong? Okay, since the beginning of industrialization, the CO2 concentrations have risen from 280 ppm to 405 ppm, and 45% is completely caused by humans. Okay, that is like it. As I said, it keeps piling up. So it has, and the concentrations are already higher than they've been for millions of years. Okay, and as I said, yeah, so that 125 ppm is enough to raise the global temperature by around 1 degree Celsius, which is the current temperature. Now you must be thinking that is such a less, like a negligible amount of increase, right? But I'll tell you why that is so important in the next slides. So first, as you can see in this graph, just look at the increase, constantly dropping and increasing, right? And then just look at the end part. It's exponential increase. This is exponential. It's literally a straight line. I mean, you can see this is just in the last few years. It's not like like a thousand years or something like that. It's not. It's very recent, and it's been happening since the Industrial Revolution. Okay. So yeah, so let me explain it. The Industrial Revolution, as we know, the manufacturing processes changed, and there were new machines and tools, and the level of emissions increased, right? So the temperature, the surface temperature, take it as 0. It started increasing as the emissions increased because of the Industrial Revolution. So the temperature rose from 0 to 1.1. 1.1 is what the temperature is right now. Okay. So the global warming, that's when people started studying global warming. And what is happening is that there's a shift in the climate. There's people argue that there's some very shallow arguments like okay, global warming is all right because at least last winter was pretty cold. So that is not what global warming means. When we are saying climate change, we don't mean only hotter summers or only hotter weathers. We are talking about a complete imbalance in the weather patterns. It could also mean that winters are colder and summers are hotter. We're talking about a overall imbalance in the system of the globe. Okay. Now, so as scientists started noticing this, they brought it to the notice of the people. And since 1992, okay, there was a protocol which was the first legally binding climate treaty among nations. It extends the 1992 United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is the UNFCCC. So that's when nations came together, and it was the first legally binding treaty, as I said. And they made certain commitments. And the thing about Kyoto Agreement in 1997 was that there were even sanctions made for non-compliant countries. So they would have to pay a certain price, like they would not be allowed to they would not be allowed to trade with their carbon permits and things like that. So in the Kyoto Agreement, one good thing was there were like sanctions made for punishing the countries which were not living up to their commitments. But so I'm sure everyone's heard about the Paris Agreement. We'll go on to the Paris Agreement now, which happened in 2015. So the basic aim of the Paris Agreement was that the countries would make commitments and work towards keeping the average temperature below 2 degrees Celsius, okay, and ideally below 1.5 degrees Celsius. Okay. Now, what does this mean? What I've just said. You can ignore the other 2 points for now. But what I've just said, why does even 1 degree matter so much? It sounds super less, right? I mean, temperatures are like 30 degrees and 28 degrees in places. So why does 1 degree matter? Okay. So the main reason, this is the main point of the presentation, which is the IPCC 2018 report. So this is the most important part. The IPCC stands for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a body of the UN. And it is the generally accepted authority on climate change because it has delegates from over 120 countries usually. And every single climate report, is verified and cross-checked by thousands of scientists from the participating countries. Okay. Now, what the report said was that it very clearly gave us a warning, saying that we have only 12 years to limit climate change catastrophe. And after 12 years, what will happen is that we'll not be able to stop global warming at all. It will become irreversible and runaway climate change will happen. So what that means is that even if you shut down every last industry on the planet, or if you stop using oil vehicles or anything like that, you'll not be able to stop global warming. So it's just imagine it's going to keep warming till what's going to happen to the planet. Then and 98, we're not talking about 1 or 2% of the scientists on the planet saying it. We're talking about 98% of the leading scientists. Okay. They've said that only 12 we have only 12 years to keep the global temperatures to a maximum of 1.5 degrees, which is also a lot. Now I'll explain to you why. 0 degrees, so I'll explain to you why 1 degree is also very important in terms of global average temperature. So 0 degrees is ice, right? But if you just increase it by 1 degree, then it's water, right? So think about places that are more or less stable with temperatures like the Arctic. Okay, uh, there, even if there's a small increase in temperature, things will change drastically. Okay, ice will start melting. It's been melting rapidly, and the rate just keeps on increasing. So in fact, by 2030 we're expecting ice-free summers. Now what does ice-free summers mean? It doesn't sound so scary. Imagine that, because we are not about small cubes of ice, we are talking about continents, like huge body, of solids of ice melting, land masses of ice gone, melted. Imagine the sea level rise. And of course there are also like lots of hidden viruses inside that may come out. So that is another thing to be concerned about, because one pandemic has troubled us so much. Just imagine this happening. So just okay, so yeah, look at the temperatures, just to give you like a fun example. The molecules here are stable, and just a little bit of increase and they start reacting, and then ice starts melting. Okay, everyone, I hope all young people know about this meme. So yeah. So yeah, as temperatures continue to rise, what's ultimately going to happen? As I said, even if it's a small rise, even if we're talking about a 1 degree rise or a 0.5 degree rise, even, okay, numerous ecosystems will reach dangerous points of no return. That means they can never be how they were before. And the thing about global warming is that some areas are warmed up faster than other regions. So some areas will be affected before other places. So you might be thinking that you are safe and all, but eventually it's going to come to all regions, climate change effects. Okay. And some regions have in fact already crossed tipping points. They're already climate change migrants. Now to come to the difference of even 0.5. There's a lot of things that will happen by just the 0.5 degree increase. I will just give you an example. So at 1.5 degrees, right now we are at 1.1 degrees, okay, currently in the present. But at 1.5 degrees, the Arctic ice would be there during most summers, not all summers, but most summers, okay. But at 2 degrees Celsius, ice-free summers are 10 times more likely, okay. And 90% of coral reefs on the entire planet will die at just 0.4 increase, 0.4 degrees more of an increase from now at 1.5 degrees. And 100% all the coral reefs will die on the planet at 2 degrees Celsius. And everyone knows how important coral reefs are, and they provide coastal protection to 500 million people. And they are important for the ecosystems, of course. And the thing is that if you lose your habitat, if a species loses its habitat, they go extinct. This is a fact. Okay, this is an established fact. So if ice melts, even if there's one ice-free summer, you can expect your polar bears to be extinct, and you will not be able to tell your kids about. I mean, you'll just be able to show them pictures and old videos of them. Penguins, polar bears, whales, seals. Okay. Now we've actually already crossed a lot of tipping points, but there's a lot more to cross. There are multiple tipping points, and tipping points, the word itself is scary because you cross them once, how do you go back? So we're not like that advanced. So there are multiple tipping points that are expected to be crossed pretty soon. And one of the most scary ones is the one you see on the right, the permafrost thawing. Now, permafrost is basically solid ground underneath, frozen ground, and they contain massive amounts, like tons and tons of methane. And once that is uncontrollable, melting starts melting uncontrollably, then we can expect runaway climate change easily. Runaway global warming and climate change. Now, okay. Now, Okay, now just to give you an idea, a little bit of idea about how climate science works. Climate science will not tell you, like, will not tell you just one, will not give you just one result or one scenario. It works on multiple scenarios. Okay, so for example, if this happens, if A happens, then this will be the result. If B happens, this will be the result. So as you can see in this, there's something called RCP scenarios, representative concentration pathways. So these are basically just scenarios. RCP 4.5 is one scenario. RCP 8.5 is one scenario. Okay, so there are many scenarios. So we'll talk about two scenarios, RCP 4.5 and 8.5. So basically what in our RCP 4.5 scenario, we are assuming that we have taken some considerable amount of action to tackle global warming and climate change. And then a certain amount of action. And then we are reaching a 2.8 degrees Celsius, by the end of the century. And I'm giving an example of change in surface air temperature over India. So just look at that one. So, and so in an RCP 4.5 scenario, where we have taken some level of action, we reach 2.8 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. Okay. And in an RCP 8.5, which is an extreme scenario, where you assume that you've taken absolutely no action and you're continuing at the current rate of the present, which is not a good rate. Okay, then you will reach approximately a 4.9 scenario, and some people even argue that some scientists argue that it'll be even more than that, maybe a 6 or something like that, which is scary. Human beings cannot survive at such temperatures. I'm talking in terms of the average global temperature. If it reaches something like a 6 or something, don't expect for human beings to survive on the planet, or even like 4. Okay. Now, just to give you a visual idea, you can see on the left and on the right, there's a difference between RCP 2.6 and 8.5. So it's completely, it looks roasted, right? The one on the right, like burnt to a crisp kind of visual. Just to give you an idea of how bad it would get. Okay. And you can see that in an RCP 8.5 scenario, it's just constantly going up, and that is how our graphs are looking right now. So that when I'm saying we continue at the current rate, that is leading us to an RCP 8.5 scenario, which is an absolute scenario. We absolutely cannot afford that scenario. Absolutely cannot. It is like literally like in the movies they show doom. We can expect something like that in the near future if we continue at this rate. Okay. It's been going up, and this is the current graph of how it is. If it continues, then we reach an RCP 8.5 by the end of the century. And also climate change is something that is gradual. So don't think that suddenly something will happen in 2090. You'll start seeing the effects in the next 5 years, and it's already happening. It's just going to get worse. Because if you're expecting something like sea level rise, it's not that water will suddenly come and submerge your land or your city. It happens gradually. So the only, if you want to be over optimistic, the only good thing is that you get a little bit of time. You can that the sea level is rising, so you get a little bit of time to migrate if it's not sudden. But it will happen. If something is gradual, the human nature is such that we tend to take it lightly if it is gradual, if the process is gradual or slow. So yeah, so now let's talk about some of the worst effects of climate change, what we call climate change trends. So a trend is, in terms of fashion, a trend is something that it goes on over a period of time, and it's frequently taken up by people, right? So trends is something, when you say climate change trends, those things will become common, very common. They will occur frequently. They'll become like a normality. Something that would rarely happen would become frequent. Okay, so these are some of the scary parts of climate change. Okay, now let's start with this one, extreme heat waves. So what are heat waves? So basically, we are talking about concentrated heat and humidity together, which can literally cook something. Okay, extreme heat waves can cook things. For example, mussels in California got cooked, okay, and they got roasted literally. And peaches in Australia, you can see what's happened. And I don't think human skin is made of special material. We are also gonna suffer something like that. I mean, and the thing is that there's multiple health issues that can be caused by more heat and extreme heat waves, right? Like permanent damage to the brains and nerves and other such things, even death. So see, heat alone is not that dangerous. When you combine heat and humidity, then it's much more impactful. So for example, if I say that if we are talking about 45 degrees and zero humidity, that is not as dangerous as a lesser temperature and more humidity. For example, 45 degrees and zero humidity is less dangerous than 30 degrees and 90% humidity. So humidity is one of the factors over here. And there are multiple temperature and humidity combinations that are defined from, the danger levels are defined from being cautious to extreme danger. Okay. So so already extreme heat waves happen. And like it happened once, like this one time in Rajasthan last year. And people were, I think they were not allowed to come out of the houses for 5 days or something like that. So that's what we're talking about. Imagine going out. This is your home, your planet, and you are not allowed, you're not able to move around freely. That is one very, it's like a human rights issue provided by, that nature is imposing on you, and you can't do anything about it. So okay, so that's one thing. Then talking about sea level rise, I'll give you an example. So this is, I'm giving you the example of my country, India. So there's this island called the Newmore Islands, which is also known as the South Kalpattia Islands. Okay, it was discovered in the early 1980s. Okay, and India and Bangladesh, its neighbor, they wanted to, each of them wanted to claim it for themselves. So that they were like continuously, there were what do you call, negotiations and things like that happening. Each of them wanted to claim it, and they were busy trying to claim the island and fighting over it. And by 2010, the island was underwater. So that's kind of funny also. And it's a very big lesson that, we'll be busy in our own petty things and climate change is just going to attack. So there's another example of the Ghoramara Islands in West Bengal, part of the Sundarban Delta. Okay. So this island, it's shrinking every year, and 48% of it is already submerged. Okay. Now this island was home to 40,000 people, and now there are only 4,000 people residing here. Okay. The rest of them had to migrate. They didn't have an option. Imagine you are just living your normal life, your career and everything, you love life, etc. And then you're made to forcefully leave everything behind and go to an unknown place with an unknown future, and you don't know what's going to happen. What if many people don't have relatives in the other places? They have no support system, and they're forced to migrate from not even natural consequences. I'd call it human-made consequences. So, okay. So what is exactly sea level rise? So I'm telling you, when you're talking about any kind of climate change graphs, there's like, you don't see any drops when you're talking about negative things like sea level rise. So as you can see, it's only going up. There are no drops in these graphs. When you're talking about sea level rise, what causes sea level rise? There's two things: melting of ice sheets and glaciers, which are adding to the water, and thermal expansion that occurs from heated waters, warm waters. Okay. So because as we know, the ocean is one of the biggest absorbers of CO2. Okay, so okay, now another thing, why is, so there's one thing which is adding to warmer oceans. That is that the white cover is reducing, and that's, as we know, white reflects heat, right? So if the white cover reduces, more heat will be absorbed by the ocean, and only 6% will be reflected by the surface of the ocean, and 94% will be absorbed. Whereas earlier, whereas with the white cover, 90% is reflected and only 10% is absorbed. So that is adding drastically to the warming of the ocean, and thereby resulting in thermal expansion and sea level rise. Okay. Now, okay, glaciers are melting. So since I'm from India, I'll be giving a lot of Indian examples from India, from that region. Right. So a new report has warned that, even if we hold it at 1.5, the global warming, the temperature, right, we still lose a third of the glaciers in the Hindu Kush Himalaya region. And the Hindu Kush Himalaya region is home to the tallest mountains on earth. And it is a source of, it is also to the rivers. Basically, the rivers are a big source of irrigation for agriculture to a lot of people, and they sustain 2 billion people. Okay. Now, if glaciers like that start melting, they're going to affect the flow of the river, and eventually they're going to affect the agriculture process, affecting the livelihood of billions of people. The agriculture that takes place on the basins is going to be affected drastically. Okay. Now, when we're talking about countries, top 20 most at-risk countries from sea level rise, you can see that India is at 4. And there are like so many others that probably you all are from. And everyone will be threatened. There's no country that is free from the damages of sea level rise in some way or the other, directly or indirectly. So I'll just give you some examples. This is a projection for by 2050. In fact, you can see that the old projection showed a lesser submerging of land, but there's a new projection which shows a much higher projection of land. So there's no reason to believe that there'll be an even more new projection, another new projection that will show probably more submerging of land. So climate change, I think somewhere we have sort of underestimated it, because every time there's a new study, there's something worse that comes up. So this is Mumbai, city in India, and I live right here next to the coast. On like you can see here, the area on the left. Okay, so that's where I live, and so I need to be even more worried about this. Then just some more examples. And I think people are not able to relate or visualize because the map areas look really small. But we are talking about millions and millions of people. So rising sea levels will threaten 200 million people by the end of the century. And we are not talking, as I said before, we are not saying that they'll be affected, in around the period of 2090 to 2100. But we are talking about the this entire century of issues like migration and suffering and shifting and everything. This entire century is going to be that, and the end result will be this. So the migrations have already begun, and it's only going to get worse. So I was going to write 200 million, like million in words, but then I thought this will give you a better idea if I put it in numbers. And you can look at India over there, the maroon, the dark red one. We especially need to worry, but for some reason it's not like that, and most people are not even aware of climate change in my country. Then there'll be salinization, because sea level rise makes salinization of coastal groundwater more likely, because salt water will seep into the fresh water. So that'll reduce your fresh water. Now, where is the global warming going? I'm talking about the heat. 90% of excess heat is absorbed by the ocean. So we should literally thank the ocean, because if it wasn't for their absorbing, you can imagine what would have happened to Earth. 90% of excess heat is absorbed by the ocean, and the oceans absorb a third of human-made CO2 emissions. Okay, so the ocean is has been very helpful so far. Now, but when the ocean absorbs, CO2 and excess warming, there are obviously consequences. Our oceans also have a limit. Okay, now if they absorb more CO2, then they will also get heated. Okay, and heated oceans means ocean acidification. Okay, now so before the Industrial Revolution, the average ocean the pH in the ocean was about 8.2, and today it is 8.1. And as I said, don't in these terms, don't think of these 0.1 as small numbers at all, because each decrease of 1 pH unit is a 10-fold increase in acidity. Okay. Now, so what happens? I'm not gonna like make this a chemistry class, but generally what happens is that concentration of hydrogen ions increase, and that causes seawater to become more acidic, and that causes carbonate ions to relatively reduce in abundance. So now carbonate ions, if they reduce, carbonate ions are very important for things like seashells and coral skeletons. They are the building blocks of these seashells and coral skeletons, right? Now these reduce, if they reduce, then it's difficult to build and maintain shells and other calcium carbonate structures, right? Like clams, oysters, etc. Okay. It's becoming more and more acidic. And last year, ocean warming crossed its tipping point. So like that is one thing that we should be worried about, very worried about. Okay, now coral bleaching. As I said before, coral reefs are very important for the ecosystem. Okay, and they also provide coastal protection. They prevent flooding and things like that. They provide protection to 500 million people. Okay, and a livelihood. So when temperatures, as temperatures are getting warmer and warmer, because there's no decrease in anything, emissions are rising, and there's no end to it. So the algae that lives on corals, they get stressed and leave, and that deprives them of food, and they get bleached. Okay, and they're at a high risk of infection. Okay, so as I said, coral reefs alone supply more than 500 million people with food, income, coastal protection, and a range of other services, which are important for their livelihood. Yeah, so coral reefs also provide vital habitats, obviously, very important for ecosystems. And they're particularly important to the world's poor. Nearly 2/3 of roughly 400 million people, okay, who live within 100 kilometers of coral reefs around the globe live on less than $5,000 per year. Okay, so and are likely to depend on seafood from reefs. Now, if that itself is going to get affected, then their entire livelihood is affected. Not to mention the dangers from flooding and things like that. This is a visual example of how it looks and how bad it's getting. We've already lost 50% of the world's shallow coral reefs, by the way. So, and 0.4 degrees more increase, and we lose 90% of the entire planet's coral reefs. Floods and droughts. So climate change, as I said, I gave you the example of summer and winter, when people argue that I think global warming is okay because winters are cold enough. So the thing is that it causes an imbalance. Summers are warmer, winters can be colder. Similarly, there will be, on one hand, there will be extreme floods, and on the other hand, there will be extreme droughts. Okay, so yeah, so agriculture around the world is going to be affected massively. And just to give you an example, droughts are expected to be even more frequent in areas like, northwestern India, Jharkhand, Orissa, and Chhattisgarh. And water security and groundwater is already a problem, and it's going to get worse, much, much worse than what it is now. Okay, now giving again the example of India, because I'm from India. India will only have half the water it needs by 2030. half the water it needs. And 90% of India's fresh water is used in agriculture. You see the like difference and how it's going to affect us. You can just imagine. Over half of India's cultivated land is under water-intensive crops that require lots of water. And 60% of India's districts have been declared critical on groundwater already. And also there's a prediction that severe water scarcity will eventually lead to a 6% loss in GDP of India. So in fact, there are already satellite images that show that, projection, they show that what was the level of water bodies earlier and what they have become, because they are drying up. You can actually go to Google and check for satellite images of water bodies before and after temperature rise. Then another very serious effect is the food security. The food security is one major issue because as temperatures rise, even plants can tolerate only so much stress before they wilt. Just like humans cannot tolerate it, plants are no exception. Corals cannot, tolerate it. So the extreme events, because of the extreme events, crop yields are going to be extremely affected. And not only that, even the crops that that survive or are harvested, the nutrition value is going to reduce drastically. So yeah, and so again, India's example, in a 2 degrees Celsius scenario of warming, India may need to import more than twice the amount of food grains that it would be required without climate change. So climate change is not just it's not an environment problem. It's an everything problem. It's an economics problem. It's a economy problem. It's a human rights problem. It umbrellas literally all types of problems. So how do we get people to even like care for climate change? Because most people are under the impression that it's a social cause. Why, like, I can only care so much for a social cause, and I've already done my good deeds for the year or the month. People don't take it so seriously. They're not able to understand the scale of the problem. This is literally the worst crisis that humanity has ever had to face. So we have to tell them that it's not about other people alone. Of course, the world's poor people will be affected much faster and worse than the rich ones, but ultimately it's going to get to everyone. And the thing is, there are a variety of health issues that come from climate change, a whole variety of health issues. Okay, so there'll be like changes in the earth system, like sea level rise, high temperature, and under mechanisms you can see what they will cause, and eventually what these mechanisms will lead to in terms of diseases and health conditions. Okay, now again, India's example, climate change is expected to have major health impacts on India. India is highly under threat from climate change, major threat. Okay, and we are expecting like increasing malnutrition, health disorders such as child stunting, vector-borne diseases, heat waves, a whole bunch of diseases from heat waves, even death. Okay, so it's not just a social justice problem. It is also an individual problem. Now, speaking of pollution, we know that that there are major pollution problems, especially in places like India, which is like right there. You can see in red as always. India is always red in color, like in every such map. So so the thing is that I'll just tell you this one thing. This year, just a few months back, we recorded, not a few months back, in November, we recorded an AQI, which is the air quality index. We recorded an AQI of 999, which is literally toxic, poisonous air. You rather go in a factory and breathe those emissions, like no difference. I mean, it's toxic. It's literally poisonous, toxic air. And the thing is that AQI should not be above 100. Otherwise, it's considered unhealthy. And we've gone to 999. Like Delhi NCR recorded 999 this year. this month in November. And the funny thing is that AQI, I suppose, cannot record 4-digit numbers. Otherwise, it would be obviously above 1,000. Even the AQI is like, I have limitations, dude. And it's just the worst warning signal, but nothing that major is being done about it. So yeah, so for okay, particulate matter indoor, air combustion, air outdoor, sorry, what am I saying? For particulate matter in outdoor air, combustion of fossil fuels with coal and diesel fuel makes substantial contributions in most places. And developing countries rely heavily on fossil fuels. Like, I'll give you an example. We here are building metros, and our government has has sort of declared and given these narratives that the metro is going to be wonderful for the environment, and people have believed it. Okay, but the ground reality is that as a developing country, where do you get power from? And obviously there's going to be massive burning of coal. So in fact, it is worse for the environment. But India is one place where, knowledge and things like that needs to be worked on, like, very heavily. So yeah, okay. Pollution's just getting worse. We're not seeing anything better. Now, as I said earlier, climate change is a slow, like a gradual problem. It takes time for us to see the most severe effects, and as I said, some places are affected before other places. So for us to reach, for the effects to reach us, or for the effects to become so severe, we tend to ignore it before that happens. But we need to understand that climate change is a long-term problem, but it requires action right now, because the report came out in 2018, and then we hardly have any time left. And don't go so directly by the what do you call that, by the amount of time, number of years we have. We can't even waste a single year, because what we need are systemic changes, and systemic changes they take time, and they need so much effort. Like, they need to be one of the top priorities. So the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change working group has said this, and I quote, "It's a line in the sand, and what it says to our species is that this is the moment and we must act now. This is the largest clarion bell from the science community, and I hope it mobilizes people and dents the mood of complacency." It's literally the worst warning that we've ever got. Yeah, so coming to this, migration and conflict. Not to sound like an alarmist or anything, I don't want to, but I'm only giving facts which are there in the reports. Some people, like some interest groups, they blow things out of proportion. Here, in fact, we are not saying half of the things that are there, because the reports are like long, lots of thousands of pages. We are like basically giving a summary of the worst effects. So it's not about being an alarmist. It's about literally saying the facts, and if the facts are alarming you, then there's a problem in the system. If still action is not being taken, if the facts are this alarming. So migration and conflict is one major byproduct of climate change. By 2050, more than 200 million people, and that figure is only expected to rise in more and more studies in next few years, will be forced to flee from their homes, and they will be referred to as climate migrants or refugees, which already exist. Many people are already fleeing because of climate change. You think your country, like countries like America and other countries, everyone, literally all countries, many countries have this thing about immigrants and refugees. Many countries think they have a refugee problem, and they cannot take in these many people or something like that. But that is not half of what is coming. Imagine, we are talking about a world full of chaos, nowhere to go, not enough resources for so many people, because lands will be devoured by, or will be uninhabitable. So where do these people go? And there's literally no answer to this. This is one of those, world war seeming worse than that, probably, crisis that is to come. Okay. And of course, there's going to be migration, obviously. and chaos. But there's going to be conflict also, which is already happening. There's conflict between Lebanon and Israel for water right now. So conflict for natural resources is going to be an even bigger thing in the near future. Now, coming in as young people, we care about our employment, right? So just to like give you one example of India again. India could lose 34 million jobs in 2030 due to global warming. Okay. And that, as I said, these numbers only increase. Like they only increase because every time scientists estimate something, and many times it turns out worse than expected. For example, the IPCC report had said 12 years, right? But many Harvard scientists said that we have only 5 years. So just take it around this decade. This is the last, literally the last decade. Even as President Obama had said that this is, the first generation to feel the actual impact of climate change, and the last that can do something about it, literally. Now, what are speaking of the risks and negative impacts of climate change on employment? Obviously, employment will be affected majorly. As I said, climate change is an everything problem. It's not an environment problem only. It's everything: employment, economy. So, the employment rate will be obviously affected due to extreme events in regions. So, what are the employment opportunities? Now, we could be all negative and say that climate change is going to destroy everything, but there's a pause. We have to see all sides of it. So the positive side is that when we are trying to mitigate climate change, which is like basically changing the system to reduce emissions or some things like that, then right, so stimulating investment and innovation in new green products and services that are low carbon will be one result. So if there are new green products and services, there will also be jobs, new jobs that will emerge. And of course, the greening of workplace practices will also have to happen. Now, when we're talking about mitigating climate change, we usually some people argue that what about development, which we cannot we cannot ignore it completely. It has to happen simultaneously. It has to start now. Okay, so because all right, yeah. So what are the employment effects of transitioning to a low carbon economy? So as I said, the benefits will be that new jobs will be created, which are green in nature, not unhealthy like now. Certain jobs will be eliminated, like the energy intensive and polluting industries. Then certain jobs will be substituted because of the transformation. For example, jobs in waste incineration plants will be substituted with jobs in recycling facilities. Then there will be majority of existing jobs transformed and redefined in terms of the requirements and working methods. Okay, so these are like some positive aspects to expect from a new system that we have to that sooner or later world leaders will have to develop. Now, talking about the problem, we spoke about the problem. Now coming to a solution. These are like just some solutions, very small number of solutions: awareness, transition to renewables, decarbonizing agriculture, green buildings. But on an individual level, what can we do? This is like a very common question, because everybody knows the problem and they realize, if somebody doesn't realize this, the seriousness and urgency, that would be surprising. Either they haven't understood the scale of the problem or things like that. So yeah, so what can we do on an individual level? So one thing is collective action, because obviously after hearing all this, I'm sure that you guys will keep this in your mind, because it's literally about existence and lifestyle. We don't want our comfortable lifestyles to be so drastically affected. Collective action. In collective action, you could make your own groups, join your own groups. I'm not saying leave your career or anything like that, not at all. I recently left my job as a product specialist in August due to internal matters. But it's not like I've taken up green, I'm with India Young Greens as a career. It's something I do on the side. So everyone in here, they are managing their job as well as this. They're doing something or the other. Even if it's like giving a presentation once a week or like once when they're free, something. So basically, the point is that it's important to be in the loop. Okay, don't be detached from the loop like corporations. Okay, so yeah, make or join existing make new groups or join existing groups and push for changes big enough to matter. Okay, and that's one thing. Then eat less meat. Livestock agriculture is one of the biggest causes of global warming. Okay, so avoid so the group that I belong to, we don't believe in things like, you know, uh, things like fanatic forcing and things like that. We will only make you aware. It's not that we are asking anyone to turn vegetarian or vegan, but just to so you are aware. It's good to be aware. If you're aware, you make changes automatically. So for example, I have reduced my meat intake. Even if you're having meat 7 days a week and you reduce it to 4, even that has a very big impact when you combine it collectively. Okay, so then there's transport. Transport, walk or cycle, you know, just avoid, try to pick public transport or private transport if possible. But these are all right, these three options are okay, but the main thing that, you know, even the IPCC said clearly, like for example, I know groups that do things like tree plantations and beach cleanups, which is all great on an individual level, but is it going to save us is my only question. If it's not going to save us, then maybe it would have been much better that if it was done 10 or 15 years back. But at the current picture, at the current scene, is it enough? So the IPCC has clearly said that individual action is not enough to save us. Okay, and the IPCC is clear that the real challenge from its report is towards politicians, political systems, and corporations rather than individuals. That does not mean that we don't do anything, but one of the best things we can do, apart from making sustainable changes, is to make people more aware, because that's people don't know what they want to demand. I mean, if you don't know what you want to demand, then how will you demand something? If people are not aware of the threats and what's happening right now, climate change and global warming, then why will any government try to do anything? Because especially the average age in India, at least the politicians are really old, like around 60 and stuff. They believe uh, that they are not going to feel the worst effects. Okay, it's not something that they should take the burden of. So if the demand is not there, then just forget about the action part. So voting, be very sensible and aware when you're voting. Demand things so that politicians act on this. So okay, now coming to action. Uh, so as I said, when scientists started ringing the bell, um, yeah. So in 1992, the UNFCCC negotiations started. Okay, I mean it was formed, and it's talking about 1992 to 2020. What's happening? Okay, so what is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change? It is, I think it's like one of the single best opportunities. It is one platform where literally all these nations come together to actually talk about climate change. So that is one positive aspect. Otherwise, talking is the first step. Okay, if you don't talk about it, then it's not a problem. So drafted in 1992, effective in 1994, and it has 197 parties. So parties means number of countries. So yeah. Okay, so now this is just a general timeline. I'm not going to go in detail, but since 1992 to 2019, the one you see in red, the Kyoto Agreement, that was the Kyoto Agreement. That was the first legally binding climate treaty in 1997. Then skip to 2015, the landmark Paris Agreement. Okay, now the thing is, COP stands for a Conference of Parties, and it happens every year under the United Nations, under the UNFCCC. Okay, and under that framework. And the thing is that the COP that we had last time, that wasn't very effective. In fact, it was a complete failure. since COP24, we have been postponing important things. And even in 25, the same thing happened. And now the COP26, which was supposed to happen this year in 2020 in November, has been postponed to 2021, next year's November. So that is like a whole year gone to waste. I mean, it would be giving some scientists sleepless nights, I think, because even 1 year is something you can't waste. Okay, now, okay, so the purpose of this presentation is to provide an overall education, not just some. It's not just some environmental class. You are supposed to know what's going on and the current situation and what are our chances and things like that. So the focus of the now let's talk about the COP26. It's been postponed to next year, but this one has to be effective. It is the most important COP so far in terms of implementation. Because see, the thing is that climate change is not going to wait. It's not, climate change isn't going easy on us. You can have how many ever meetings you like, but climate change is happening. What's the point of having meetings and spending so much on these politicians coming from such far lands and adding to emissions, in fact, during their travel, so the COP26 is the most important, because the thing is that the Paris Agreement, talking about the Paris Agreement again, the Paris Agreement was nice, it was good, but the thing is, like Kyoto Protocol, first of all, it did not have sanctions for punishing non-compliant countries. So if countries are not living up to their commitments, there are no punishments, unlike what was discussed in the Kyoto Protocol. Okay, so the thing is that in COP26, what is required is the strengthening of the INDCs, which stands for the Intended Nationally Determined Contribution, basically just the commitments made by countries. Because in the Paris Agreement of 2015, there are two aspects. One thing is that the commitments that were made were not good enough at all to reach the goal. The second thing is that even the commitments that were made, nations are not living up to it. So what do you do? Right. So, in fact, I attended one workshop. We were invited by the Green Party of England and Wales to attend a preparation workshop for the COP26. So these were like some of the things that we need in the COP26. These are things that must happen: strengthening of commitments, the INDCs, then creating legally binding rules. So I'm sure everyone has heard about America pulling out of the treaties and the Paris Agreement. Okay, now a huge superpower like America pulling out, it was literally demotivating for so many places and people. So the thing is that we discussed that we should have something like legally binding rules, so that just that if one day there will be one person in power, then another person in power. So it's not like the second person should go ahead and pull out during the process. So that will completely destroy the plan of mitigation. So there should be legally binding rules which pose certain sanctions, and people should not be able to leave agreements, no matter who the new leader is. Okay, that, and the other thing is finalizing Article 6. So the Article 6 is the last part of the Paris Agreement, and in fact they've been postponing it forever. I mean, in COP24 they postponed it, like they left it for COP25, and now it's still yet to be finalized properly. So what the Article 26 is will basically set the rules for the carbon market. And how do you start implementing? You can talk how much ever you want and all, but if you don't start implementing, then what's the point? Climate change, like, time is running out. So COP26 is super important. This has to happen, finalizing the Article 6. So okay, then there's this thing that is called MAPS. It stands for mitigation and plan. Was it mitigation and action plan scenarios? Okay. So that is basically a collaboration among developing countries. So I was also suggesting that these kind of alliances should be discussed in the COP26. Because so I will give you a better brief later on about maps. So coming to actually, yeah. So coming, okay, wait. So I think I will show that video now, the one about maps. Just a second. So maps is, as I said, it's a collaboration among among some developing countries. I think it's 5. So just to see the process and give you an idea, I'll play a short video. Because the idea of this presentation is to give you an overall sense of what has happened, what is happening, and what should happen, and how it should happen. It's not like only the politicians should be aware of, the solutions and, just give our future in their hands entirely. So I'll just play that video. Okay.
What is a sustainable development pathway for a country that is low in emissions and climate resilient? Introducing Developing Country X. Country X plans to alleviate high poverty levels by growing its GDP by 5% per year. It wants to expand its core industries of mining and agriculture and needs to develop its energy sector in order to do this. It is eager to exploit gas funds off its coast and develop renewable energy in the form of hydroelectric reserves. Country X participates in the UN climate negotiations. It supports plans for emission cuts, but is unclear which actions will benefit or threaten its growth. It decides to take the MAPS approach in understanding the development options available to it. The process begins with a mandate. This mandate outlines the objectives of the process. It also ensures that the outcomes are owned by Country X's political leaders. The MAPS approach then draws together a team of leaders and experts from diverse interest groups, including government itself, business, the finance sector, and civil society. This team is known as the Scenario Building Team. The individuals on the team have unique expertise to build scenarios for realistic, short, medium, and long-term futures for Country X. At the same time, the MAPS approach gathers a first-rate research team. Its task is to generate new data and build and operate economic and sectoral models that are specific to Country X's context. These models link overall economic indicators such as GDP with sector-specific technologies and natural resources to project the impact of specific policy interventions, for example, investment in clean technologies. Consensus forming within the scenario building team can be a heated affair. The MAPS approach employs a professional, independent facilitator to steer the process towards success. At the end of the 2-year MAPS process, Country X is a set of development pathways. These show different policy options and their long-term implications for the economy, its citizens, and the environment. The government of Country X can now start taking informed action. It also has the ability to access green finance to kickstart its new growth approach. MAPS provides the collaboration and support needed to establish the evidence base to build a sustainable development pathway that is low in emissions and climate resilient.
Yeah, so that was one example of these are the kind of programs we need. I mean, the thing is, people would argue with me about, tree plantations need to be increased and things like that, but it's not enough. We have to ask directly what is the solution and work towards the solution, which is basically systemic changes. Vegan and changing diet patterns is one thing that would be common behavioral changes, but behavioral changes alone is not that enough. Systemic changes have to be done, and individuals cannot do that. The only people in power can do that. That's why the COPs and things like that are so important. But of course, the behavioral changes are important because ultimately people will also adapt to the new systems. So, okay, so now coming back to solutions, we're almost done. There are majorly two problems right now that humanity faces. One is how fossil fuel burning has to come down to zero in the next few years. Okay, there's not like 5% or 10%, 10% or 5%. It has to be zero in the next few years. So, and that is one problem. How do you transition to a zero fossil fuel system globally, not one country, the entire globe? And the other major problem is, as I said, carbon dioxide is one stubborn gas that stays in the atmosphere for hundreds of years, for centuries. Okay, so even if you stopped it, there is too much of excess carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So what do you do about that? That is like a different problem in itself, because because that is going to continue to heat the planet anyway, even if you shut down things. And heating the planet, when permafrost, if it continues to melt and that degree of uncontrollable melting happens, then anyway runaway climate change is inevitable. So one problem is, how do you make emissions zero? How do you stop fossil fuel burning completely? The second problem is, what do you do about the existing carbon that is already has been emitted, the extra carbon that has been emitted in the atmosphere? Okay. So one very controversial solution for the second problem is the carbon capture technology, which we have, and scientists are suggesting the need to remove about 10 billion tons per year. So it's super controversial for a reason. The thing is that it's seen more like a fantasy technology. We've never done things like geoengineering on a global scale. It's not been tested on a large scale, and many corporations may use it as an excuse to carry on as they have carried on with doing since till now. Okay, so it is a fantasy technology, and what is at stake has to be considered. Literally, existence and normal lifestyle, our habitability of the planet is literally at stake. Okay, so can we literally depend on a fantasy technology that hasn't been tested on a large scale? I mean, we are talking about geoengineering. We are not that advanced yet. We haven't reached that level. I remember when I was younger, I used to play games about geoengineering. Okay, it's literally still a fantasy. So the point is that we cannot take a chance. If carbon sequestration works, good. If it doesn't, that we cannot afford that kind of loss, that kind of price to pay. Okay, and also the thing is, things like what do you call it? Things like
unmute.
Sorry, just unmute or just mute yourselves. So there are several geoengineering techniques. Carbon capture is one, but each solve certain problems. Okay. For example, there's a technique called solar shading. So in that you spray aerosols in the stratosphere, and that will reduce temperature, but it will also reduce rainfall in an abnormally large, in an outsized manner. Okay. So we haven't tested these things, and doing these things. Geoengineering is something that it's not right now our thing to try at this level of civilization development. It's something that's it's a thing about the future. So taking a chance like that, it's highly controversial, and it's something that we should not depend on at all. Okay, so okay, and right. Now to come to local, efforts made by people. Many people, in fact, it's the young people that realize that their future is at risk. So many activists, I'm sure you've heard of these people. Okay, Vanessa is she is popular for standing up for the Congo rainforest, and there was this in one incident that happened. I'm sure everyone heard of it. She was there was a conference to which these activists were invited, and of course Greta Thunberg is one of the many popular ones, one of the most popular ones. And the thing is that she was cropped out of the photo. Okay, so that by the AP news agency, and then later on they apologized for it. So that that is just one incident that was there in the news. So there are other climate, local climate action that local people are taking. This is another example. So climate action, as I said, at an individual level, not there's no solution at an individual level, but this is something that will push the governments and authorities. Please mute the mic. So yeah, so what was I saying? Okay, so UK was the first place to declare a national climate emergency. And of course, the protest levels, like the peaceful protest levels, are pretty high over there, and they do react to it, the authorities, to the demands of the people. So I would say peaceful, non-violent protests, some things like that, in a democracy, especially when they're allowed, should be done. Okay. So yeah, as I said, on a planet which is 4 degrees hotter, all we can prepare for is extinction. And yeah, so let me tell you what's happening at the current degree, which is 1.1 degrees. This sounds like it's like not real, but it is real. Around 150 to 200 species of animals, plants, and insects are going extinct every day, like every single day. And we're not talking about 200 animals, we're talking about entire species. Like you wake up tomorrow and there are no dolphins. That's one entire species. All the dolphins disappeared. Then 200 more species like that. I mean, in fact, the scientists believe that we've already started a 6th mass extinction, and the people are not aware of it. These things should be headlines. They should be on every news channel and on every, headlines of every newspaper. And you know what's surprising and outrageous at the same time? 71% of emissions, total global emissions, are caused by only 100 companies. 71%. That is so there's a narrative that's been set. I don't know if it was deliberate or it just got formed naturally, but say, this narrative that individuals need to do this and plant more trees and things like that. But ultimately, when you see the statistics and the figures, 71% of emissions from 100 companies, just make changes to that and imagine the change. So the point is that the scale of this problem is huge, and at an individual level, we cannot solve it. Okay, so I will throw a few facts at you. As I said, 200 species, animal, plant, and insect species going extinct every single day. Then 71% of emissions coming only from 100 companies. And did you know that 80% of your oxygen comes from the ocean, not from trees? Only 20% comes from trees. You can go and study about it. 80% comes from the ocean. Then imagine the kind of health of the ocean, that the way we are compromising with the health of our ocean. Microorganisms, small living things in the ocean, like phytoplanktons, that provide oxygen. The waters are getting heated. Phytoplanktons prefer a colder climate. Just think of it this way: 8 out of 10 breaths you take, just breathe right now. 8 out of 10, and try to imagine, 8 out of 10 breaths you take comes from the ocean. Now try holding your breath, like take away those 8 breaths. Just imagine. the ocean is getting sick, and it's crossed its tipping point, warming tipping point. So who knows what's going to happen in the future. And then apart from that, 60% of wildlife has been wiped out. Okay, 60% on the planet. Okay, it's gone in less than 50 years. Not I'm not talking about centuries or in a million years or something like that. In the last 50 years, less than 50 years. This rate, the problem is not emissions and the problem is not things like meat consumption alone. The problem is the rate. Again, the problem is not the temperature rise alone. It is the rate and the extra factors adding to it. So the rate at which it is happening. If 60% of wildlife has been wiped out, then in less than 50 years, then what else will happen in this century? Okay, 83% of mammals that have ever existed gone. Can you imagine? Like, these are actual real facts which are not there on every headline and news channel. Okay, so yeah, just to give you an idea. So this is right. So literally, your actions today will literally affect your actions tomorrow. As I said, we don't have a single year to waste. We at least have to get talking about it, make it a topic of discussion instead of things like, I mean, I'm not saying not to talk about other things, but just push it in. You're talking about Hollywood, push it in, just mention it. People should know that, people should feel that this is a GK topic and they better know about it. Or they'll feel like they are lacking in knowledge somewhere. So that thing needs to be there in society. People need to feel compelled to know about climate change. Okay, right. So that's that.
All right,
Okay.
Beautiful. Thank you, Ishpriya. Thank you. It's been intense. For me, it's been intense. I hope everyone else at least added 2 additional information about climate change, about the global action about it.
I hope I haven't missed things because I slept pretty late again. At 5 or something.
It's okay. It's okay. I think we'll still have some kind of a chain webinar where we can talk only about climate change, about what people are doing in the Asia Pacific region, maybe what governments are doing, how is the global power reacting to it, because this is important. If we don't have our environment to live in, I don't think we will be able to live. So it is an important issue. So first, I'm going to ask, is Vivek still here? Yeah. Vivek shared with us a 2 minutes video called The Future Is Now. It's by Discovery Channel India, and it talks about India in 2050. So he or she, I'm not very sure. They shared the link that I will be sharing now again. And if anyone is interested, please do check it out. It will be an interesting video to watch. And our first question is from Nidal, who is not, I think, in the participants. Okay, for this anymore. But her question was, what is the Indian government planning to battle the climate change effects? Yeah.
Okay. So basically, on a policy level, India has done pretty well on a policy level. Okay, it's ranked 9th in the Climate Change Performance Index, which is great. And surprise, the first 3 positions have been left vacant because they were like, nobody's performing that well, and I don't want you all to get carried away. So India is ranked 9th in that performance index, but that performance is that is determined solely on the policy level, not implementation and action level. And I can vouch for the fact that India as a country is brilliant at making promises and dealing it to the level that people even forget about them. Sorry. Okay, so India is so as I said, at a policy level, it has made certain promises, and in the COPs, the smaller, like the island nations and smaller nations and even NGOs are sort of pushing developing countries, to, in fact, all countries to increase their level of commitments and their INDCs, which is the intended nationally determined contributions. But in places like India, Brazil, they are arguing. India is saying, like, first let's complete the previous commitments, then we'll think of more commitments. But these commitments are not enough, first of all. And what's funny, that only 1%, like the level at which they are working to satisfy the current commitments also, 99% has been left. It looks like they are leaving it to the future leaders. That's how dull their work is. So yeah. So okay, also, like, I'll tell you something. 21 of 30 most polluted cities in the world are from India. So just not, India is not acknowledging it at the level it should, especially publicly, because the public is so unaware.
So first, before I continue to the next question, and I have a message from Ridi, I'm going to set off a poll. I need you please so that we collect our data. We have 3 polls. I just need where you're from, and like which region you are in, and the age range that you belong to, and if you're politically affiliated or not with a Green Party or with any other. So I launched it. Okay, I'm going to also talk about Ridi. As you all answer the poll, please. So Ridi apparently is from India. There's a lot they're trying to do as an individual, but at home, to mitigate their carbon footprint. But they're wondering, how can I do something at a much larger scale, like you guys, like us? I am passionate, but directionless. Ridi, if you'd like, I'm going to send you a link of the India Young Greens. Ishpriya is also the India Young Greens convener. So conveniently, you are here at the right time. So we have okay, so we have Ishpriya and we have Anita also from the India Green Party. So if you're interested, you can join that. If you're interested in a political party, please do join the Young Greens. If you'd like to have an impact that is not really related to the political affiliation, you can also contact us through Facebook on APYGN, and we can connect you to the Indian groups that we're currently supporting. So 62% of our participants, okay, we're still having votes in. Okay, so 11 out of 8, okay. So Josh actually asked, Ishpriya, there are 2 questions from Josh. The first one is, can climate change be reversed, or is it already too late? The second question is, will climate change completely wipe out humanity, or is this exaggerated? So.
Okay, so we have actually, sadly, already locked in a certain level of temperature increase. So we don't know of any way that we could sort of completely reverse and go back. We've locked in 1.1, but we are trying to avoid 1.5 and 2 degrees. So reversing is something that we have to leave to the scientists. It looks like not possible right now. We've locked in a certain temperature increase, and yes, the other thing you asked was,
will climate change completely wipe out humanity, or is this exaggerated?
The first thing is that climate change in itself is going to cause system collapse and lifestyle changes, okay, and complete chaos. When we're talking about completely wiping out humanity, scientists are saying that it could cause extinction at an RCP 8.5 level scenario easily, or at a optimistic scenario, it could worsen our what do you call it? Our quality of life majorly. Literally, like there are that I upload memes on my Instagram climate crew page. Like there's one meme where this one person is going on a vacation and his entire backpack is burning, and the title is when you are trying to enjoy your vacation but you warmed the planet to uninhabitable levels. So the quality of life is going to be bad, even if you want to say that there's no extinction. People are definitely going to die. There's no doubt about that. But talking about the entire race disappearing, that is something that we have to see how climate change goes around. But it is quite possible. Yeah.
Okay, so our next question is from Najah. She's saying, consequent to climate cure COVID-19 is causing, is the adaptation mitigation approach, is it going to change to lowering consumption, thus reducing fossil fuel need for production?
It's going to change. Okay. So there was another question before that. Do you think that COVID-19 reduced global emissions and consequently reduced the global temperature? That's what we all thought in the beginning, that it's something good, but then later on we got to know that it's negligible. It's negligible. No difference. In fact, we've again reached a record high of temperature increase and emissions. And you know, when people are trying to get the economies back on track, will push twice as hard.
For
it
the
might be
production,
worse.
Yeah. All right, our next question is from Noor Al Huda. Why do countries in the North Hemisphere, why are they less affected by the climate change, knowing that Europe and America contain a large number of factories and other smoke-emitting engines? This is actually, yeah, it's an interesting question. So the global North is less affected than the global South, actually. This is what I think. I mean, even then, most of the developed countries, most of the powerful countries exist in the global North, while the underdeveloped and still semi-developed countries are in the global South. So most of the factories do exist in the cheaper areas, which are mostly in the global South, namely India and all the other global southern countries. So although they are still affected, it is easier for them to make the policies and implement them because they have a more organized system going. Unlike in the global South, the countries there, they're still trying to figure out how to strategize their governments, how to stop being corrupted, and other things. Like, I don't know if Ishpriya would like to add anything. This is what I think from my own point of view.
True. And anyway, underdeveloped and developing countries are going to suffer first and worse, okay, in the beginning especially. Because developed countries can sort of, you know, postpone worst impacts of climate change.
Okay, so we still have one more question, I think. So there was one of the participants also, he shared a statement that people are aware that the climate change is happening, and according to his understanding, he said that we are past awareness phase. By creating awareness and bringing in policies, we can control this. but it's a long-term thing. There are immediate infrastructure development with a vision to save people from climate change. Example being floodgates, stronger dams, building that can withstand earthquakes, climate neutral technologies. Apparently, America announced $2 trillion on it. I don't know if you heard about it. Ishpriya?
Sorry.
Yes.
Sorry. Can you please repeat the last part? Something. Yeah.
All right. So apparently, he says that there's already awareness about this matter, and that with bringing in policies, we can control this, but it's a long-term thing to create policies and implement them. So what he's suggesting is that there's an immediate infrastructure development. There's a need for an immediate infrastructure development, and it can save people from climate change, like floodgates, stronger dams, buildings that are anti-earthquake, climate neutral technologies, things like that. And apparently America announced $2 trillion on it. What do you think about this statement? Like, in my opinion, it's like, it's not a one thing solution. It's kind of a drastic change.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. So if you can.
And how much for when you're talking about policies take time to be made, how much time do you want? We are having COP since forever. You saw the timeline.
Yeah.
If you're taking so much time to just to set rules for a new carbon market, then what?
Yeah,
In fact, I said COP26 is very important for implementation sake.
Yeah, I mean, the policies not only need to be created, they also have to be implemented, which is the issue in most countries.
Right, the implementation is the big issue.
Yeah.
And as I said, I give you an example of India. I'm just giving facts. I'm just giving facts. Okay, so they do come up at the global front, portraying themselves as leaders of climate change mitigation and things, but internally, I'll give you one example. They proposed a new draft called the EIA draft, which is the Environment Impact Assessment. Basically, that EIA draft, which they have proposed. So every project needs a clearance, right? If there is too much of a negative impact, then they don't get a clearance on the environment. So this new draft that they have proposed, it's like a list of loopholes that are being added to the system. I'll give you an example. That one of the things that the draft states is that companies, industries can start their project before getting a clearance, and all they have to do is pay, 2 to 10,000 rupees of fine, 2 to 10,000 rupees of fine per day. That's it. It's clearly a loophole to encourage, incentivize industries to start working, to do more projects. Because compare that to a 2,000 crore power plant. I mean, it's negligible. It's clearly an incentive, just giving an example. And similarly, then the metro projects that are happening, they are portraying like it's an environmental friendly thing, and we are, environmentalists and things like that. But people need to know that it needs coal. Developing countries depend on fossil fuels. That's a fact, and it's in fact going to be worse when you dig deeper and do your research. It's going to be worse for the environment.
There's Harshit. How do we overcome the obstacles of mainstream politics and actually educate people about the climate change? What do you think?
Sorry, how do we overcome the
obstacles?
Okay.
Yeah.
And actually educate people. Best part is, the important part is, don't obviously be peaceful and non-violent at all times. Okay, that is the first thing. Because I've seen groups outside India and other countries that have gotten into big trouble for being overactive. Okay, so educating people is not important. Now, see, I've told you so many facts, you don't even need all of them. Just remember the 0 degree, 1 degree IPCC report. Even if you know that much, you can start presenting in schools and colleges. And these are things that people don't know. So you obviously already have more knowledge than them. So there's no need to be scared or being intimidated by anything. Just know 3-4 facts and go and start. And on the way, you keep learning more facts. I also started, I was in college. I'm just 21. I passed out this year in May. So I started last year in my third year. So I knew the fact, and I was just like, why? Especially allergy. I have a mild allergy kind of thing, and these allergies also get worse with climate change, obviously. So any kind of small negligible conditions will also get worse. So on an individual level, also you're like concerned about your own thing and your future. So I was very like, it was on my mind, and I was like, I need to do something. So I just made a group on Instagram. Put awareness things about climate change, and messaged me. Then those people looked like interested people. So I was like, hey, do you stay in Mumbai, which is my city? Are you a student like me? Let's go. Let's make a small team and start educating people. So that's how I met. Literally handpicked the first group of people, meeting them in cafes and things like that. And then since all were students, you were like, dude, which college are you from? Let's start from your college. And since you are a student, we will easily get permission. Okay. Yeah. So that's how there's no rocket science, just start. Yeah, I've seen groups. Yeah, there are some groups in India, like a new group. Even on the first meeting, they are discussing what the group is about. And even on the 15th meeting, they're discussing what the group is about. Just go and do it. You'll figure it out on the way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's also the obstacles of mainstream politics. In my opinion, also it's not very important that the politicians are aware of climate change because everyone is actually aware of it. But some people just choose to look the other way. So what you actually need is to show that to people that we're at a point where we need to adapt, and we have done the adaptation ever since Neanderthals and like the Stone Age. We have been adapting every season. We adapt to the temperatures, to the food, to everything. We have adapted so much, but right now it seems like we forgot that we can adapt. So basically what we need to adapt is to find a lifestyle that can actually help climate change to stop. So we have grown to adapt to a lifestyle that is so intensely effective. It affects the nature that we live in, the environment that we're living in, the pollution, the amount of pollution that has overloaded Earth, and the amount of resources that we all, like all countries, they use so much. We have become a consumerist, an intensely consumerist people. So what we need to adapt into is something less. We need to use less. We need to consume less. We need to find another way, which is adaptation. It's just people should not freak out. And yeah, don't punch them when you're explaining.
True. And try to be politically correct.
Yes.
You know your government best. Try to be in your limits. That's it.
Yeah.
Start with awareness. Go on to organizing events.
Exactly. Najah Santed. She's
take permission from your local police station and do marches. Don't just okay.
Yeah. See, Najah says, go and do it. You will discover the way. Yeah, good slogan. Good slogan. So everyone, it's been wonderful. If you still have any kind of questions, please do ask us on APYGN or on our Facebook page. And I thank you all for being the first participants to an APYGN first webinar about climate change. Thank you all for joining in, and I hope this added one thing to your life at least today. And thank you all. Thank you.
Seeing that we did it at the last moment, I think it was pretty good.
It was
literally started spreading the invitations like 2 days before. Okay, first webinar, it's okay.
Yeah.
Second for me.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.